All right, so question for you, and this is kind of a
Yes.
methodology, and I'm going to tie it into the two teams that just played for the national title. Have you considered weighting returning production relative to recruiting, right? So
Yes.
under the theory that like Nevada and Hawaii are pretty much decimated, and they don't recruit at a high level, so losing
Right.
those guys who were contributors for them is a bigger deal than it is if you're a team that returns a ton of talent. Like Alabama's 65th, and that seems really high to me for Alabama.
Yep.
Like normally
Yep.
they're
Oh
not
yeah.
65th, and
Yep.
Georgia is where Bama normally is at like 96th ish. Does
I
it
have
matter? Like returning production matter less if you have more freaks?
Oh yeah, and that's why recruiting is 1/5 of the formula. I have tried to play with like a weighted scale where if you return almost everybody, your recruiting rankings matter less, and if you lose almost everybody, your recruiting rankings matter more. I mean, maybe there's a good way to do it. I haven't found a way that makes it better than simply applying 20-ish% of the projections to recruiting rankings, and that basically that pretty much solves it. I mean, Georgia is in the 90s in returning production. They're still second in SP plus in the preseason here, and they would have been first if Ohio State hadn't been 25th in returning production. So yeah, the teams that recruit the best, it is built to give them pretty spectacular benefit of the doubt, and that's why I included the conference averages in the SP plus post, just like what are the average ratings per conference. Like all the P5 teams are projected to improve, or P5 conferences are projected to improve slightly, especially the SEC, because now A&M is recruiting like Alabama and Georgia too. And then all the G5s are projected to slide slightly for the most part. I think the AAC is experienced enough to pretty much handle that, but I mean, that's kind of the way it works. Recruiting is just about giving you benefit of the doubt for the most part. It gives you more margin for error, and I think that bears out in the formula for the most part.
So Georgia being 96 does not mean that they can't win a title. Like we've seen teams close to 100 returning production win it.
Yeah. I mean, that's most of the playoff teams in a given year. This is a weird year for that, but most of the playoff teams in a given year are going to turn around and rank like 90th or worse. I think Alabama, when they fielded the greatest team of all time, potentially in 2020, they ranked like 80th in returning production. So, yeah, I mean, that's to be that good, you're going to have a lot of experienced guys who are going to turn around and go pro. And the teams that recruit at a top 5 level are going to, handle that just fine and turn around and be okay again.
When we talked about teams being like hilariously bad or hilariously good, I laid out a little bit of a blueprint of something that I look at. I don't know if they will not be hilariously bad, but I do think that there's the potential for hilarious results with the Tennessee Volunteers, a team that ranks number 3 in offensive SP plus in the preseason, number 42 in the defense SP plus, and 9 overall. They're top 35 in terms of returning production. Where are you at with the Vols, man?
The problem with Tennessee, and I realize I could go any number of directions with that. I could go a countless number of directions with that. Like I mean, I know why they're there. Their offense leaped to 7th last year. Their defense was good, and then late in the year it kind of fell apart, but it still ended up top 50. Like they improved on the field. They were, obviously they bowled, which was a little bit of a surprise from the start of the year. But they also, they lost by 7, they lost by 5, they lost by 3 in the bowl game. They were close to being a lot better than 7 and 6. The biggest issue is that, like, we know the Josh Heupel offense by now. Like Bud and I used to talk a lot about covariance, just this idea that some teams will play better than average against the good teams and worse than average against the bad, and then some will do the opposite, better than average against the bad and worse than average against the good. Tennessee is very much the latter, or Josh Heupel's offense is very much the latter. It is built to exploit whatever advantages it has, and if it has some advantages, they will score 48 points on you easily. If they don't find an advantage, there's no, it's not so sophisticated that they're going to find their way forward against Alabama, against Georgia, against the teams with top 10 defenses. And that makes them kind of hard to figure out. They only play 2 projected top 10 teams. They also play Pitt at 13th. So, Kentucky at 21st, it's not an easy schedule, but like you can really they're going to beat Ball State. They're going to beat Akron. If Florida I mean, I don't know about Florida. Maybe they'll be fine against Florida. They'll be favored against LSU, favored against Kentucky, Missouri, South Carolina, Vanderbilt. Like you can easily get to 8-9 wins there, even if they can't move the ball against Alabama very well. It's just, can you play at a top 10 level or a top 7 level, I guess, or an 8 or 9 or wherever they ended up? Can you, what's your ceiling when you can't really move the ball against the best defenses? Not that many can, but for all their prolific points and against like Missouri and whatnot, they're still going to struggle against Alabama and Georgia.
How's Missouri looking?
Fine.
Fine.
We've
settled into this comfortable place of like at least having some level of confidence that Eli Drinkwitz is going to go out there and field competitive teams, right?
Some level of confidence that the defense is going to line up in the right spot now.
We did not have that at the beginning of last year.
First half of last season, I mean, it was the strangest thing I've ever seen. Like that, whoever was Tyon Evans, the guy who had like the 90-something yard run against them against Tennessee, like you could tell at the snap, like, oh, there's a big wide open space right there. And he just trots through it for 91 yards. Like they didn't blow anybody off the ball. There was just nobody lined up where they were supposed to be. And that seemed to stop over the last half of the season. So, I mean, I could spin that. Let's see, the projected 64th on defense. If they're, if the second half of the year was real, maybe they could be top 40 or 50. And now they might lose Steve Wilkes apparently to the NFL. But, that's possible. On offense, they're projected 51st because they lost Bazelak, but Bazelak wasn't great. Like Brady Cook or Horn, the incoming freshman, could match what Bazelak did. You could see a top 40 production there too, but they're projected 54th. That feels about right to me. They're going to fight for a bowl again. And in theory, maybe that changes one of these years, but they're certainly settling into a 500 or bust kind of situation right now.
Like, all right, somebody has to finish last in the West. Your numbers seem to think it will not be Mississippi State.
Yeah, it's going to be Auburn.
Yeah, well, I agree. That's actually
I've
been looking at texts from other coaches who were like, "Hey, I heard," and I was like, "You heard something publicly?" And they're like, "No." I was like, "Okay, well."
Yeah, who's coaching?
We're all thinking the same thing.
Yeah, Bill, who's coaching Auburn next year?
Jeff Grimes.
Kevin Steele. They're going to flip all the way back around, and he's going to hold the.
Kevin Steele just needs a nameplate that can slide into every college football office. Like, oh yeah, sorry, Mario, I'm gonna have to
40.
Take this, Kevin Steele's got like LED lights for his Zoom meetings. Like, all right, now I'm at Miami, and now I'm at Auburn.
$40 million. They're looking at $40 million in buyouts in a year and a half. Like, I just like, come on, like that's we're gonna, as I joked on Twitter, like. The Malzahn years, every single year was dramatic. Every single year was like, oh, he might get fired. Boosters might get their way. That's going to be looked back at as like just an amazingly stable time on the Plains. SP Plus says it's going to be like, what is it? Not that anybody's projected to do poorly, but LSU being last, Arkansas 6th, Auburn 5th. I figure by the time August rolls around, the portal will have made a dent in Auburn's projections a little bit further. And maybe they're projected lowest at that point. But LSU, I mean, they're 45th, well behind everybody else. And I get it. I don't necessarily agree. I mean, Brian Kelly, I don't know if he's a top 5 team coach, but he's definitely a top 15 team coach, and he'll probably get them back to that level. But I get why they would be projected in the 40s right now.
The other thing I briefly here before we finish with Ole Miss, it seems like with the early signing period, people are firing their coach earlier and earlier in the season. And there's really no way for SP Plus to be like, hey, I got to make an adjustment for this team basically quitting and playing just for themselves and not one another for the last 2 months. But USC as well. Yeah, exactly. Like when I looked at the SP Plus this morning, I was like, okay, I'm going to have to manually adjust LSU and USC, even independent of the transfers, because I don't really feel like the data they gave us last year was a true indicator of their talent level and organizational level.
Yeah. I mean, LSU did it 2 years in a row, though.
That's true.
So that's true. A little. USC was decent in 2020. Was projected to be like top 15 or close to it, and then because they were so horrible down the stretch, they finished 82nd. And again, that was mostly defense. The offense wasn't great, but it was still 45th. Defense was 106th. And again,
Coach
Grinch.
got fired on September 13th. What kind of motivation are you going to have in October and November? Your coach
offense
got
still
fired on September 13th because it's fun to score touchdowns.
No, like if I was making manual adjustments, I would like change their last year's rating in the formula to 60th, 50th, maybe not 82nd. And that would probably make at least a 1 or 2 point difference in the projections this year. But I mean, again, like their offense is projected 33rd. I assume it's a top 15 offense. I assume that adjustment should be made. I don't know why I would possibly expect the defense to be better than about top 70, top 80, maybe, just because
for USC.
Right. Yeah. LSU again, like I 2 years in a row is different than doing it 1 year, but USC was also way worse than them last year, I guess. Yeah, it's hard. Like this is a situation where if you're going through and you're making manual adjustments for, say, betting purposes, there are certainly, you're maybe adjusting LSU a little bit. You're probably adjusting LSU or USC quite a bit, especially on offense.
Last one, Chip.
Last one. I got to take a dog to the vet. So.
Yeah, all right, we got the portal. We got the portal king, Lane Kiffin, who is tweeting out memes, trolling Brian Kelly. And yet they've taken a ton of transfers. We've rated their transfers really highly at 24/7 Sports.
Yep.
They're 98th in returning production. Where are they still having to, like, where should Lane Kiffin go out and grab some more portal guys right now so that they can get that number up?
Yeah, if they want to game the projections, then adding another couple of receivers would be the way to go, I think. Because obviously Zach Evans, that's a pretty exciting addition. He only had 92 carries and 10 catches last year. So that only makes so much of a difference in an offense where 3 guys who had 100+ carries left. But that's where they struggled. Like obviously Jackson Dart was another situation where he's exciting, but he only threw for 1,300 yards. So they still only returned 36% quarterback production, 24% of running back production, like 40-something% of receiver production. That's where the issues are. Defense, they have issues too. But obviously the offense was why they were particularly good last year. And so that ends up being a little concerning there. I mean, we'll see. Like again, in a world of manual adjustments, I'm probably adding a couple points to their offense. But that's why they're so low. Their skill core just is gone from last year. They had to rebuild it from scratch.